Hi everybody, this is Bentley the Compost Guy Christie here, and I just want to talk to you about something I call the Vermicomposting Trench. This is something I came up with a couple years ago when I was working with a local restaurant. I was taking a lot of food waste off their hands on a weekly basis, and unfortunately I just couldn't keep up. In order to continue with the project, I needed some sort of solution, and I needed it fast. So I thought that some sort of burial method seemed like the most promising idea. And of course, I didn't want to leave my composting worms out. I wanted to get them involved as well. So this, in a nutshell, is how the trench idea was born. Now, the basic idea of the vermicomposting trench is that it's an in-ground worm bed supplied with rich organic matter. Composting worms are introduced, and for best results, you want to locate this system next to or within a garden so that the plants can directly access nutrients and water. Now what this means is that you don't have to harvest any vermicompost, which is always nice. New food materials are generally going to be added on a continuing basis, and you can layer those or bury them, and you want to cover everything up with a nice thick layer of bedding materials. Just some things to keep in mind. It does work best if you do continue to add food waste materials rather than set everything up at the beginning and then don't add any more. The reason for this is that what you're going to see is the level in the trench is going to sink substantially otherwise. Thick layer of bedding is important for moisture retention, but it is also important for buffering extreme weather conditions. Keeps things cool in the summer and warmer in the winter and colder weather in general. Some of the cover bedding examples include straw, hay, grass clippings, and fall leaves. The hay, the grass clippings, and fall leaves also serve a double benefit of being great food materials as well, so those are always good ones to use. Fruits and vegetable waste, these are excellent, especially during the summer, because they do contain so much water, so the plants will benefit from that. Things like manure and some of the other dryish materials, while certainly excellent for your trench, will need a lot more watering. This is basically how I made mine. I set it up like a giant worm bin or worm bed. I started by creating the vessel, which was the trench, of course, and this was a 2 to 3 foot deep trench. I layered bulky bedding materials, things like cardboard and paper waste at the bottom. I added lots of rotting food waste, alternating layers of food waste and bedding. I stocked it with worms, and then I covered it with a thick layer of bedding. And you start with the digging. The digging is not going to be the fun part. This is the part that most people aren't going to enjoy all that much, but I strongly encourage you to do it because this is something that can be used for years to come, and it's a fantastic system. So 1 to 3 feet deep should work well. The deeper it is, the more anaerobic the lower zones, so something to keep in mind. But on the flip side, if you make it too shallow, it may dry out and freeze a lot more easily. The first thing to do after you dig is to create what I call the false bottom. This is just a lot of bulky bedding materials. Absorbent materials work best, so paper and cardboard, these sorts of things. It helps to soak up excess moisture and retain that moisture as well, and it's going to provide the worms with a bit of habitat structure down at the bottom. Next, you add some waste materials, and again, the food wastes are great if you have enough, and you may want to let them pile up for a while in order to have enough to get your system started. Grass clippings and fall leaves are great secondary materials. Again, those are also really good bedding materials, so I do recommend you add those. Aged manure, again, really good, but you will have to add quite a bit more water. And then you just rinse and repeat. You add more bedding, you add more food, more bedding, and so on and so forth, all the way up to the top. Now before your final layer of bedding, you do want to add your composting worms. You don't have to add any specific quantity of them. I find that it works really well if you just add a bunch of material from another worm composting system. And then last but certainly not least is that final layer of bedding that helps to protect everything over top. And this can be straw or one of the other materials like grass clippings. In 2008, my sandbox garden was the home to pumpkin plants and potatoes. Everything did really well. The pumpkins in particular especially well. They seem to really benefit from that water-rich food material. My goal was essentially to produce at least one big pumpkin because this was basically my daughter's first Halloween, her first real Halloween. She was born the year before, but she was an infant at the time. And we did succeed. So I was really happy about that. We got one nice giant pumpkin, a few smaller ones, and we had a lot of fun with that pumpkin. And once his job as jack-o'-lantern was finished, of course, he went right back where he came from and repeated the cycle all over again. In our fence line trench, our tomatoes were the main crop, and they also did very, very well. We had some other crops along there as well, and I'll talk about them in a minute. But again, the water-rich food waste seemed to be an excellent material for helping the tomato plants to stay healthy and to grow quite quickly. Now this is sort of a shot towards the end of the summer. You can see the tomato plants are up over the top of the fence line there, and these are some zucchinis that did incredibly well, and that's not too surprising. Zucchinis are pretty easy to grow, but they really seem to benefit from the water-rich food materials. We had a pretty good crop of beefsteak tomatoes and also a lot of Roma tomatoes as well. We ended up sending bags of these things home with friends and family at the end of the year, so that was nice, and we certainly had lots for ourselves, for our own cooking, etc. as well. Now in 2009 I decided to change things up, and I grew pole beans and corn in the sandbox garden, and some rebel potatoes happened to crop up as well, which is kind of funny. I wasn't sure how the corn was going to do. It is a more demanding crop, and I wasn't adding waste materials on a regular basis quite the same way I was the year before, and it was the manure, so I wasn't really sure how I was going to do, but everything seemed to work out quite well. The beans did really, really nicely. They grew up the stalks and produced a pretty good crop. What's funny is that the pumpkins were planted over in the fence line garden, but they just couldn't seem to stay away from that sandbox garden. Not really sure what was going on there. But once they were over there, they set up shop and had some pumpkins. So that was nice. And just some perspective here, I couldn't believe the size of some of these leaves. My daughter was about 2 years old at the time, and as you can see, some of those leaves are just absolutely gigantic. So let's just do a quick wrap up here. The vermicomposting trench is a great way to fertilize your garden without chemicals. It's a great way to use composting worms in your garden. You can't really use composting worms in your garden otherwise. It's also a great way to process a lot of different types of waste. Your yard waste, your food waste, manures, all kinds of different things. And of course, as I learned firsthand, you can process large volumes of waste materials. It lets you avoid the hassles of harvesting vermicompost, which is always nice. And I highly recommend that you give this method a try. I think you'll be very glad that you did. If you want to learn more about the vermicomposting trench, be sure to head on over to redwormcomposting.com, where you will find the Hot Topics link. And on that page, you'll have a Vermicomposting Trenches link that will show you all the blog posts that I've written on that topic. And just one little plug for our newsletter. If you're not already a member, please do sign up. You get lots of updates and lots of information about vermicomposting in general. So thanks for sticking with me all the way through this video. This is once again Bentley the Compost Guy Christie, and I'll talk to you again soon.